Europa is hauntingly beautiful. It stretches on and on into nothing more than white desolation, with only a peppering of life throughout. Though this vast and wide white nothingness does not encompass the totality of Europa, as tundra and ice flow break for the scattered remains of a better yesterday, the mangled corpse of what could have been, what should have been, looted and plundered, ripped apart by thieves that care nothing for the past beyond the value it can bring them, a skeletal visage of a bygone era left for the carrion eaters, a feast for crows. How fitting, I think, then, that it takes center stage in one of the most phoned-in, content-barren, derivative DLCs that Bungie has ever developed.
I also think it's strictly larger than Shadowkeep last year. And so, that size comes from Europa's brand new.
So let's start with some praises. First, Beyond Light looks and sounds incredible. The art department is really carrying the game at this point. I don't think anyone is going to argue that. The soundtrack, like always, is exquisite, and the effort put into bringing stasis to actuality is incredible. Europa is hauntingly gorgeous, as vast vistas will stretch out before you, dotted with Vex architecture, or fallen buildings descending into ruin, or the labs of the Golden Age. Each area is beautifully crafted and a pleasure to explore for the first time. Whether it's Braytech facilities where the scattered remains of Vex and Exo can be found, or driving a Sparrow through the wastelands of Europa at night only to have a blizzard obstruct your view. Visually, the game has once again delivered. Second, Beyond Light does a really good job of bringing together all the various storytelling elements that Bungie has experimented with throughout the years, from cinematic cutscenes to vendor interaction to voiceover during quest. However, to quote the bard himself, Beyond Light is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The narrative of Beyond Light, not to be confused with the storytelling elements that tell the story, does a horrible job of incorporating the player into the A-plot. We're essentially nothing more than meat attached to a gun that kills things. This is further punctuated by one hilariously awkward exchange in the story, where Aramis, the big bad monster of the week, and Varix, the main vendor, who you might remember from Destiny 1, as the Prison of Elders vendor, are arguing.
Aramis is wrong. About Varix, about Elixni. Varix came to Europa for a second chance, for the right thing. That is strength, not weakness.
Oh, please, Varix. You only came here to hide, like a coward.
No! Releasing Vex put Elixni lives in danger. Many have already perished. Aramis, you are the real coward!
Silence! I've had enough of you, Varix. I will enjoy watching your skull shatter into pieces.
Sitting there playing that made me feel like how Jesse must have felt in Breaking Bad during the dinner scene.
Did you also tell him about my affair?
Is a rather cringeworthy exchange that was likely funnier than intended, and really hammers home just how much of a bystander we truly are in this story. In Beyond Light, we fight for and against characters that we have no investment in a plotline that we have no stake in, past the generic, oh no, big bad monster number 3587 wants to destroy the traveler in the city, ... again, ... who will save us? It's a stale and monotonous formula, and Beyond Light doesn't even try to attempt to spin it into something new. And in many ways, Beyond Light's central plot is little more than a retread of Destiny 1's House of Wolves, a House of Wolves 2 Electra Boogaloo, the HD remake. And anything that seems like it could be world-changing or move the needle of the franchise is only surface level at best. Take this moment for example when Aramis is talking to the player character and says, "We could have been allies."
Oh, Pawn. In another life we may have been allies, but instead you put us at odds. So I have no choice but to use darkness to rip, shred, and tear through every single one of your kind.
We won't let you.
This is a real hold on, wait, back up moment. We can solve this diplomatically? Diplomacy's an option? But of course, diplomacy really isn't an option because this is nothing more than surface level storytelling at best. The story seems to serve as nothing more than a reason to give us stasis, a new suite of subclass abilities, and teach us how to use them. If I was to take a probe deeper into the A-plot, even more than the story bothered to, it revolves around Aramis, the Kell of House Dark, and the primary vendor for this DLC, Varix, who is partly responsible for the death of Cayde 6, back in Forsaken. So we're already off to a terrible start when it comes to reasons to give the player to care. Past the aforementioned, "Oh no, we must stop Aramis because doom! Doom for all, I say! Doom!" There's also this poorly handled Fallen Lives Matter narrative that underpins the story. This could have been a genuinely fascinating commentary if it was handled with any grace, nuance, or sincerity. I mean, think about it. The Fallen are not too dissimilar from humanity in the grand scheme of things. They had their civilization uplifted by the light, then destroyed by the darkness. They escaped this calamity, became survivors, and for centuries served as a dark mirror to humanity. Now, through endless conflict, their numbers are diminishing, and they need to build something new, something that can last. That could have been a very compelling story, and is something that they try to broach, but it's immediately betrayed by the wholesale massacre of tens of thousands of Fallen, whose entrails we gleefully ransack for loot. The A-plot of Beyond Light, simply put, is not very good or well conceived. With all of that said, the B-plot of Beyond Light, which is actually player-driven, is much more satisfying, dealing with us obtaining the powers of the darkness and unlocking the mysteries of Clovis Bray. This amalgamation between Dr. Frankenstein and Josef Mengele, revealing the horrors that Bray committed in the name of creating a legacy. Through this plot, we also learn about established characters like the Exo Stranger and see her grapple with being from another timeline, and the horrors that she both readily committed and ultimately had to commit. It's a remarkably engaging and well-done story that feels more intimate and meaningful than the A-plot. It's also tied more directly with our exploration of the darkness and the state of the universe, far more than House of Wolves 2 Electra Boogaloo does. Regrettably, there's not a lot of the B-plot, and each story beat is sandwiched between ludicrously grindy fetch quests and relegated to the post-game. This is the plot that, in my opinion, should have been the main plot of Beyond Light, as the whole Fallen Civil War, not Civil War, will they, won't they, comes off as little more than a digression, a deviation that is remarkably derivative of everything that's come before it, and not an evolution of it. A story that would have been better co-signed to the lackluster hell that is Season Pass content. Now that we've discussed the narrative of Beyond Light, what about the gameplay? After all, Destiny is first and foremost a game, and while a comprehensive narrative that flows well and makes sense would be nice, I assume there's a lot of people who play Destiny not for the story, but for the runny, jumpy, climby, shooty bits, making their way through the story as quickly as possible so that they can start leveling and get to the endgame. So, how does the gameplay stack up? For starters, Beyond Light didn't ship with a significant amount of content. The content on offer isn't just anemic, it isn't just bare bones. It's straight up non-existent, and in my humble opinion, Beyond Light does not deliver enough content to justify its price tag. More so when you itemize it comparatively to other Destiny DLCs. I've done other videos on this, but the long and short of it is, Taken King added 1 new raid, 4 strikes, 8 Crucible maps. Rise of Iron added 1 new raid, 3 new strikes, 4 new Crucible maps. Rise of Iron is also noteworthy because unlike Forsaken, which Bungie had a ton of help with, or Taken King, which we know was made up of an undetermined amount of cut content from Destiny 1, Rise of Iron wasn't planned, and put together over the course of 6 to 8 months after the delay of Destiny 2. Forsaken added 1 new raid, 1 new dungeon, 4 new strikes, 4 new PvP maps, the Gambit game type and its 4 maps. And finally, Shadowkeep added 1 new raid, 1 new dungeon, 2 strikes, and 3 PvP maps. Beyond Light in comparison has its story mode, Europa, 40% of Destiny 1's Cosmodrome, 1 new strike, and 1 raid. Beyond Light is more akin to something along the lines of Bungie's $20 DLC offerings, and while people like to argue that Taken King was made up of cut content, or that Bungie had help with Forsaken, that's only a legitimate argument if Beyond Light was priced accordingly, but it's not. So that argument is ultimately invalid. That said, quantity isn't always everything, more so when the content on offer is exceptional. So while the narrative could be utter nonsense, the content of each story mission could be singularly magnificent, right? Conceptually, the mission structure is more akin to a classic first-person shooter. In Beyond Light, Bungie has moved most of the arbitrary bloat, the get 20 sniper kills in the Crucible, or the go kill 50 combatants with ice, or the go retrieve the shriveled frozen eyeballs of 532 dregs, to the post-campaign. And while there are still go here and grab this MacGuffin missions padding out the story, the most annoying padding will inevitably be the arbitrary level gates. A bizarre decision on Bungie's part that further disrupts the flow of the narrative, as one second you'll be playing the story, the next you'll be forced to stop what you're doing and play something else. This wouldn't be so tedious if it wasn't for the fact that there's virtually no new content in the core playlist. We have 1 new strike, no new PvP or Gambit maps, no new PvP game types, and this leveling is further compounded by the way endgame leveling works. You need to play enough to level up so you can play the story, but not enough to level up so you collect the weekly reward. As for the story missions, most of them are largely forgettable. Bloated by traversal across big empty spaces leading into repetitive corridors. It's not uncommon to have Variks tell you to go to one place and collect a MacGuffin, only to then have you go back to that exact same place a mission later to kill someone. For as wide and as vast as Europa is, this really just underpins how there's nothing there. And which should be the centerpiece of these missions, each boss fight with their own unique gimmick like in Forsaken, has anything that could even remotely approach being interesting thrown out the window, as the missions boil down to nothing more than press the super button to win, as you're basically given unlimited supers during many of these encounters or missions. The story missions come off less like a challenge or a piece of interesting content, and more like a way for Bungie to circle jerk about just how cool stasis really is. And while the more traditional first-person shooter mission structure is greatly appreciated, as is removing the arbitrary grind segments that have plagued every Destiny campaign and placing them in the post-game, I can't help feel the way that the boss fights are done removes any challenge or satisfaction from them. You basically super for 2 minutes and get disappointed by the loot. Which is really sad, honestly, because I was really looking forward to fighting Fallen on kind of a Guardians level.
Was frozen today!
Stasis. Stasis is the selling point of Beyond Light, a ludicrously powerful set of abilities that has already trivialized most of the content and turned PvP into an absolute shit show. The key hallmark of Stasis is the ability to freeze your opponents. Are you one of those people that can only enjoy PvE content when you are monstrously overpowered, stripping out all challenge from the game and turning it into a glorified point-and-click adventure? Trivializing every encounter outside of endgame content, and even then, to where it is less engaging than watching paint dry? Well, then you'll like Stasis. The game was not designed for Stasis, and Bungie didn't really do anything to adjust the AI or the way the world was built to incorporate Stasis better. In PvP, the freezing mechanic puts the afflicted player in a timeout where a button press is required to break free, but at the cost of some health. However, in my experience, being frozen is almost always a death sentence. A long, slow, drawn-out, frustrating death sentence, as you sit there in timeout, waiting to die, just so you can respawn and do it all over again, all because somebody threw a grenade in your general direction, and it glanced your pinky toe. It's frustrating to the point where I would rather skip the arbitrary freeze mechanic and just die every time I was frozen, which, even with the breakout mechanic, can and will likely happen. So you're put in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. You're going to die anyways. And the frustration on this is compounded even further because there's no reward for unfreezing yourself. There's no punishment to the player that froze you for not capitalizing on that situation. Something that, like getting an overshield when you break free of the ice, would at least help with. Point is, freezing mechanics in any PvP game has never been done well, and this is no exception. And if I might broach something that comes needlessly close to a nitpick, the press and hold button instead of button mashing, single-handedly violates every gaming convention ever, and just feels wrong. Basically, the takeaway when it comes to gameplay for Beyond Light is, did you like playing the content you've been playing for the last couple of years? Well, take half of that away, and now play it with stasis. Also, PvP is fucked.
Darkness, our ancient enemy. Foretold by many they came, as the Warmind warned us they would. They were confronted with fire, and when that failed, met with intrigue among the bones of Io's last monument to the light. It promised us power, and for it, a price was paid.
Now, I couldn't finish a Beyond Light review without talking about the 850-pound raging silverback gorilla in the room, sunsetting, and the Destiny content vault. With Beyond Light, Bungie sunset 75.5% of total legendary weapons that existed in Destiny before Beyond Light, and Beyond Light has only contributed a paltry 5.9% of what it took. And mind you, what we got isn't all new weapons and gear. Most of it is reissued weapons and reskins. Beyond Light also gutted half of the game and only introduced Europa, a vast wasteland of nothing, one new strike, and a raid. No new PvP maps, no new PvP modes, no dungeon that we're aware of, and only 40% of the Cosmodrome, a good bit of which was already in the game. So unlike with say Forsaken or Taken King, the other $40 DLCs, when playing the Strike playlist, instead of having 4 new strikes to look forward to, you have 1. Instead of having a handful of Crucible maps to learn, you have none. And game types? What's a new game type? Bungie sure as shit doesn't know. As I stated earlier, the content on offer isn't just anemic. It isn't just bare bones. It's straight up non-existent. At best, Beyond Light is a $20 DLC in the vein of Warmind and Curse of Osiris. The fact that Bungie has the gall to charge $40 for Beyond Light and another $10 for the seasonal content that releases alongside Beyond Light in its release window, on top of filling the cash shop with things like legendary armor, is appalling. This is a cash grab of the highest order, the same sort of practices that the gaming community would lambaste EA or Activision for. Developers and failed political journalists who masquerade as game journos often like to talk about player entitlement. What we see on display with Destiny 2 Beyond Light is a mixture of poor game design choices, bad narrative pacing, and an appalling level of developer entitlement. Not just to the player's money, but to the player's time. And frankly, it's disgraceful. None of this is to say that Destiny 2 Beyond Light is all bad. At the end of the day, it's still Destiny. If you like the combat of Destiny, the runny, jumpy, shooty, looty content, this is just more of that. If you love the lore of Destiny as I do, Beyond Light has introduced some of the best lore in the series to date. For example, for as one-dimensional as Aramis is in the story, in the lore, she's actually a fascinating character. But the lore should never be a replacement for the story. The new mission structure is fantastic, and even if the story is not that great, the way that Bungie weaves all the various storytelling elements together is. And I have nothing but good things to say about the art and the music of Destiny 2 Beyond Light. But for everything that Bungie gets right with Beyond Light, they get so much more wrong. Narrative focus, level design, sunsetting, and content vaulting, the price of the game versus how much content you actually get for that price. Player balance in both PvE and PvP, all of which goes from not particularly good to outright disgraceful. And honestly, I think I could have overlooked a lot of these issues if there was more content, if there was more strikes, more PvP maps, more loot, a proper vendor refresh. But that's not the reality, and Bungie is charging close to the full retail price of a brand new game, and barely managing to give us more content than one of their $20 DLCs. And so, I have to review what's there, not what might be there. And I find what's there lacking. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did. Subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon. We also now have merchandise. But above all else, stay frosty.